told my coach, I'm trying to quit smoking. And he said, well, I heard that psilocybin helps with that. I just read this study. This is what's going on with my life. I need to do something. Many times you have to do something different. And doing something different is often uncomfortable for our brains. When I'm in a problem state, I can't think of something good. That's the nature of a problem. It's very self-contained. In psychedelic integration, it's very helpful in preparation for people to understand that everything your brain says should probably be examined before you accept it as truth.
Welcome to episode 61 of Superstates, Practices of Transformation with me, your host, Joshua Peters. Superstates explores the crossroad of using trance states to access personal or professional growth. And in each episode, we talk to world-class experts, to industry leaders, and to revolutionary thinkers who are sharing with us the latest information and tools and their own personal stories to inspire you on your journey. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast host or on YouTube so you can stay up to date with new episodes. If you enjoy this show, give me a 5-star review. That's the best way to help it grow. My guest this week is Greg Lawrence. Greg is a transformational coach specializing in psychedelic integration. In today's episode, he shares his journey from overcoming his own personal challenges to helping others navigate their paths to healing and transformation through various states of consciousness. Are you interested in exploring different states of consciousness and their impacts? Tune in to The Power of Psychedelic Integration with Greg Lawrence. Welcome to Superstates. I'm here today with Greg Lawrence. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Joshua. Super interesting subject. Can't wait to talk about it.
I'm excited to chat with you. I think that you're going to have a lot to share around different states. To start with, Greg, why don't you tell us what you do and how that makes an impact on people's lives?
I am a transformational coach, and probably about 50% of the work I do is in psychedelic integration. That means that I will work with people before and or after a psychedelic experience. The middle part, because of legalities, that's not something a psychedelic integration coach technically does. I'm there to help prepare people, and then afterwards take their lesson or theme, and there's always a lesson in the psychedelic experience. And find out what people want to do with that. Like, what sort of change or shift do you want to make? How do you want to move forward with this? Because there's always something that comes to people during the psychedelic experience. It's like, I didn't know that bothered me that much, that I wanted this, that I didn't like that I wanted to change that. It just becomes glaringly clear. And then you have to step back and kind of figure out, wait a minute, is this like do I need to adjust myself, or do I need to adjust something outside of me? Do I need to set boundaries? Is it about my career, relationship, or is it just about how I relate to those things? Once we've determined that, then we can sort of determine a plan of attack. So I'm a certified life coach, certified psychedelic integration coach. I'm an NLP master practitioner, and I'm an HNLP certified coach. So using those tools, we can figure out what we need to do, or what a person might want to do, and how I can help them. Because in this work, the clients do all the work. That's not how most coaches like to frame it, but people do all the work. I'm just someone who happens to know processes, and I can be there and sort of work with the people and stay with them while they go through some sort of experience of change. And in everyday life, then we're talking about what people come to coaching and or therapy for. And that is, I'm doing something I don't want to do. I'm not doing something I want to do. I'm feeling something I don't want to feel, or I'm not feeling something I want to feel. That's like 99% of the issues that bring people into coaching or therapy.
Yeah.
So once again, we have to determine what's going on here. Is there something in your life that doesn't fit, or are you not fitting into your life somehow? And then we move from there. So that's basically how I spend my day, and I have a blast doing it because, I was a very different person 10 years ago. And the whole idea of what happens in between external stimuli and what comes out of me fascinated me, mostly because I didn't like what came out of me most of the time. Yeah. And I didn't understand how that was happening. How is it that I know this thing's going to happen, and every time it happens, I do this thing I don't like? What's going on in this black box? And NLP just unfolded all that and explained it. So now it's like there's a map of exactly how those things work and what you can do about it.
Mm.
And changing the way that I respond to things and changing the states that I'm in, because it's either a matter of controlling your states or managing your states or being okay with your states. There's no such thing as a state you're supposed to be in.
Right.
It took a
Right.
while to figure that one out, but it's just a matter of figuring out what I need to do and having a clear roadmap on how to do that. And I thoroughly enjoy doing that myself. It can be a little bumpy, so I really like helping people do that. I sort of do the work that I wish someone had been doing for me
Yeah.
back when I was trying
I
to get
mean,
help with this originally.
that's pretty much what what us as coaches are really doing, right? We become the person that we needed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Why don't you share how you got here then? It sounds like there's some that you had some of your own challenges. Kind of give
Oh,
us
yeah.
a little bit of your backstory.
I used psychedelics in my late teens and 20s, along with anything that I could put into my body so I didn't feel the feelings that were going on inside of me. I didn't know that's why I was doing it. I thought I'd just like to get high. But I got mixed up in hard drugs and my life pretty much spiraled out of control. I
Mm,
was at that point where something was going to happen. I don't know what. I didn't have money, way to pay my rent, didn't have a job. And at some point when I moved into the place where I was living, I know I had a car. And at some point I didn't. And to this day, I can't tell you what happened to that car.
mm,
I don't know if I gave it to someone, traded it, if it was stolen, I lost it, but I didn't have a car, didn't have money. And luckily, I was pulled out of that physical environment. I moved away from the place where I lived and I cut ties with all the people who, I had been in a sort of a drug culture with. And I stopped using all substances except for cannabis, which I abused for a long time, in my personal opinion. And then 10 years ago, my wife at the time passed away. And I didn't expect it at the time. I was deep in grief and I realized that all of this stuff getting churned up in me was a lot of childhood trauma that had never even been looked at, much less addressed in any way. So I started working with a therapist. I started working with a coach. And at the time, I smoked cigarettes. And I told my coach, I'm trying to quit smoking. And he said, well, I heard that psilocybin helps with that. I just read this study. You know, this was like 8, 9 years ago when all of the studies were just starting to come out. So I thought,
mhm.
well, I know about mushrooms. I used to take those. So I got some mushrooms. I took them and I didn't quit smoking that night. But I did see all of the things that were happening in my life and my part and other people's parts and why I was doing the things I was doing and what I wasn't doing that I should be doing. And at the end of that, after about 4 hours, I thought, well, now that I've seen all that, this is what a lot of people think. Now that I've seen all that, it has to change. And about 2 or 3 weeks, everything was the same. And I couldn't figure that out. So rinse, repeat a couple of times, same thing. I would have these epiphanies and insights, and nothing would get done about it. My life would still be the same. I'd have the same issues over and over. So I started looking around and I found out about this thing called psychedelic integration. I had never heard of this. I went to an integration circle. Now I've been leading those circles for 8 years now, but when I went, it was a place where you met people, they shared their experiences, and you got support from people. It's a place to build community and find the others. And I listened to what people said about how they were integrating their experiences and found that almost none of that worked for me. For the most part, people were like doing the things that they were already doing, like, oh, I meditate and do yoga. They were meditating, doing yoga before. Meditating and doing yoga is great and it can help you sort of soak up the things that happened in psychedelic experience, but it doesn't create a new neural pathway.
Mhm.
To create a new neural pathway, which is a new habit, pattern, way of being and thinking, I got to do something like I'm right handed. I got to put the pin in my left hand. And I immediately noticed that's not comfortable. Like, I don't even know if my fingers are in the right place. Here, I just do it. And here I'm like, wait, is my thumb in the right place? Does it need to move like that? And if I start writing, if I'm writing like a shopping list with my left hand, really concentrating and writing like a kindergartner, my brain's going to be screaming at me to put the pen in my right hand because that's what it's used to. This we can do. This we know how to do this. Don't do that. That's really hard. Well, this is what it takes sometimes to form a new habit after a psychedelic experience or after really any peak experience, after any kind of realization like this is what's going on with my life. I need to do something. Many times you have to do something different. And doing something different is often uncomfortable for our brains because there's a part of our brains that still thinks it was 15,000 years ago and winter's coming and we need to eat some berries because there's not going to be any food and we only have one piece of fur and we're not going to be able to have a fire. So don't waste a calorie doing this different thing. Just do things the way that you've done them. That's sort of
Mm.
how we're still stuck in that part of evolution in our brains to a certain extent.
For sure.
So I got here because once I learned how to do integration, and once I learned what to do with the information that I gleaned from any peak experience, my life actually started changing. And like most coaches, it was like, well, I want to be able to share this with people. I want to be able to help people do the same thing that got me to where I am now and gets me to where I'm continually going towards. I'm always working on myself, always trying to grow. But I am the help that I wish I had at that time.
Yeah.
And there's a particular way that people work with people. And I have a particular way of working with people, which is something that I couldn't find. This whole mystery of what's going on with me cognitively. Why is it that I'm thinking this and why is it I'm doing that? What happens between the time somebody says something and I have some response I don't like? Unraveling all that stuff was pure gold to me.
Yeah.
So I enjoy going through that process with other people.
So you started out with the integration circles and then getting the integration training.
Yeah, after a while, when you lead integration circles, people start coming to you and asking for advice, and you do some sort of counseling. And after a while, I thought it would probably make sense if I had if I really learned this formally, and I got certified as a psychedelic integration coach. That was a little over 5 years ago, and
Okay.
for probably about 4 years ago, I ran a small business at the time. I started doing coaching pretty much full time 4 years ago, and I really couldn't sustain the other business after a while because this is my full time job now. So, like 2.5 years ago, I just closed my other business, and this is my day job now.
And where did you get your NLP and HNLP training? When did that show up?
NLP training, you could say technically I got it from a place called INLP Online, but really I got it from a lot of reading and a lot of studying, a lot of training in various places. People like Robert Dilts and Richard Bandler, David
Hmm.
Gordon, and HNLP is something that was developed by a man named John Overdurf.
He's
That I think took my work to the next level. So I've been
yeah.
studying with John for a
Mm.
year and a half now. I've gotten to know him. He's a friend and a mentor. I've trained with him in person, and I continue to do that. I'm part of a supervision group with him. So HNLP is really, I think, what took my work to another level. That
I I
really
uh,
just everything clicked for me.
I trained with Sean and Sarah Carson
Ah, yes.
and
Okay.
Jess Marion and
Yep.
it did the HNLP training, and I would 100% agree. It took me from uh, doing certain processes with people to being fluid and in this ability to just kind of roll with where they're at. Very brilliant. John Overdorf is a brilliant man,
It really
and
is.
some of the top coaches that I know, every single one of them, he is their he is one of the people that they really look up to and mentor with. So
It-
love
you
that.
know, the,
Love that
the
you've done
keys
the
to the kingdom to
HNLP.
me are this is what most people don't know is what's a trigger. So what's a trigger? Something bad happens at one time, and I have a bad feeling in my body. And those two things are fused together in my nervous system with no conscious intervention. Like my
Mm,
unconscious mind is a half a second ahead of my conscious mind, which is like the really confounding factor in all this most of the time. But that thing is fused together with a bad feeling in my body. And every time that happens, I have that feeling. Happens, I have that feeling. Then my nervous system starts looking around and generalizing. It's trying to help me. I mean, generalization is how it says that's a door too. So you know how to work doors and you know how to drive cars and you can get on the computer because you've done all this time. So you can do it without thinking about it. Well, our minds like to take things that work well in the physical world and try to make them work in the psychological world. That doesn't always work very well. So it starts generalizing and says, you know, that thing that gave you a bad feeling, that's kind of like that. So you should have that feeling there. And that's kind of like that. And that's sort of similar to that. So you're just, I don't know how many iterations away from this thing. And someone has a tone in their voice or a look on their face and poof, we're off to the races. And I don't know why, because it happened before my conscious mind could do anything. That's why we're like looking at the caboose going, what happened? I didn't even see the train.
yeah,
HNLP shows you how to undo that nervous system, that hookup in the nervous system, and actually unglue those things so that that thing can happen and I don't have that reaction. And that very much relies on states because the law of dominant effect in hypnosis says that if you bring two states together, the most powerful state wins. Problem is, when I'm in a problem state, I can't think of something good. That's the nature of a problem. It's very self contained.
Mm.
So when someone else is there and they can draw you out of that problem state and get you to a particular state and bring you back to that thing, you can flatten it.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing process.
Yeah.
And there are many different versions of that and many different ways of doing that. And it goes far beyond what I was used to in coaching, was basically trying to tell people, why don't you try this? Well, this all comes from clients.
Mm.
All the answers come from them, and they're doing all the work basically. I'm just someone who, can help guide them to a certain place, but they have all the resources.
What would you say then has changed the most for you from when you first started to when you're working with clients now?
Oh my God. Well, the first thing is just the realization that people are doing their problem for you.
Mm.
Like in the first few minutes, people are probably going to do something and it's going to show you like this is probably something that's an issue in their life. Like everything you observe takes you closer to having an understanding of what's going on with them. And even if you don't, you understand that they're capable of changing, that everything's changing already, that people are constantly changing. I mean, the subatomic particles that make up me, I've probably exchanged like 20,000 or 30,000 of those with other people somewhere in the world just in the time that we've been talking.
Mhm.
And in a year, over 99% of these things will be completely different. I'll still have the same basic form somehow, but I will be a completely different entity. But in my mind, I'm going to be a lot the same, and my problems will be the same because I work very hard to keep those problems in place. And that's one thing that it's hard to realize, that you have to work very hard to make sure this problem stays the same while everything around it is changing. So having that realization and having the realization that all we are is change is something that's very helpful in coaching. And realizing that I'm working with a person and there's a problem over here that's interfering with this person. This person's not their problem. They're not that, and I'm not doing battle with them or trying to convince them or something. That person and I are working on this problem that they said they would like to address. So we're sort of a team trying to look at this thing and trying to change that person's relationship in a productive way to something that they're thinking about or looking at. Because that's basically what these things boil down to.
Mm. So that makes me come back to the idea of different states, which is kind of where you were starting here. What are you noticing around states of consciousness as you're working with clients from this HNLP kind of frame?
Well, it really comes down very much to what people are paying attention to. And we have to pay attention to something very particular because what we call our conscious mind is simply what's in our conscious attention. And in the mid 50s, George Miller determined that that's seven plus or minus two chunks of information. That still holds today. So at any time, I can be aware that, I'm thirsty, I'm going to take a drink of water, I'm talking to Joshua, I'm going to make a note about getting the file from him later, and I just had lunch and I need to put those dishes away. And I get to 9 and I can't have anything else. That's all I have. Our unconscious mind is everything else. Everything we've ever remembered, dreamed, thought about, imagined, everything that's happened to us, it's all in this huge room, and there's this little flashlight shining around on seven plus or minus two of those things.
Mm.
It's all the same thing. Unconscious mind is just a metaphor for everything that I'm not currently paying attention to. It's just a metaphor for what I'm not paying attention to. That means I've chosen to pay attention to out of who knows how many things in my mind, how many millions of things are in my mind. I'm focusing on seven plus or minus two. I had to pick those. My brain is telling me for some reason it's a good idea to look at those, or that I need to look at those. And those are making me feel a particular way. Those are putting me into a state.
Mm.
You know, uh, our thoughts are controlled by feelings. Our feelings determine our actions. Feelings control. Feelings have some effect over thoughts. Thoughts have some effect over feelings. They bounce back and forth between each other. But what I notice is when you are paying attention to something. So here's a typical thing with someone I was really depressed all day long. Okay, well, what happened? Well, I got up, I was really depressed. And believe me, people are depressed. I'm not making light of this, but there are various levels. So someone who's a little bit depressed might say I was depressed all day. What happened? I got up and I was really depressed. It was a really bad day. And then, I drove to work. And then I was at work. Everything was okay for a while. Then I got up and I was really depressed. It's like, well, what happened? What happened when you're at work? Well, I was really busy. It means I was paying attention to something else. So If you are able to pay attention to something else and you don't feel that bad feeling, then it's a matter of what is it that's making you want to pay attention to this thing? Is it a habit? Is it something, is it some anchor? Is it something in your environment? Is it your brain telling you that if you just keep thinking about it, you're going to solve it, which is not something that usually happens?
Hmm.
So, does that answer your question?
It's, uh, I mean, it was a pretty open question. So it's what I'm hearing from that is really the state depends on where you shine that flashlight. So you
Yeah.
can shine it on the depression or you can shine it on the busyness at work. And either way, you're right.
I would say you can shine it on the thing that's causing you to feel that feeling of depression.
Mm, got it.
Because that's what it really is. We're looking at something in a particular way. Because when someone makes a change, well, I'm going to say this carefully. I was going to say the memory doesn't change, but memories do change. There's a thing
Yeah.
called memory reconsolidation, which you probably
Mm.
know about.
Mhm.
Memories do change in quality, but that original event's never going to change. What's going to change is really my physiological reaction to that.
Mm,
So it's my relationship to that physiological reaction, even more than the original thing that we're looking at. But it's not the thing that happens. Our feelings don't come from people, places, and things. Our feelings come from the way that we think about people, places, and things, including memories.
yeah. Yeah. Like,
So
as you're saying that, what comes to me is like an experience where I'm seeing something and in my mind, it's making me feel a certain way. But that thing isn't doing anything except being the thing.
it's being there. Yeah.
And my own mind is taking that thing and kind of wrapping it around like all you said, like, oh yeah, all these other things, when that happened you felt this way, so this is kind of sort of similar to that, so now you're supposed to feel this way, and boom, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do now.
Well, let's add something else into that, and that is that let's just say there's a surgical procedure that's sometimes done on people who have treatment resistant seizure disorders. And in this surgical procedure, they sever the corpus callosum. That's the part of the brain that connects the right and left hemispheres.
Okay.
Right hemisphere can, it can see and hear and taste and smell and feel things, but it can't communicate. Left hemisphere can communicate, but it can't do any of those other things. Once that severing occurs, most people don't have seizures anymore. It's a very effective procedure for people who have a particular type of seizure disorder, and they appear to function completely normally. However, if you show some information to strictly their right side, their left side has no idea that you've seen that. So, someone who's undergone that operation, let's take one guy, they showed him on the right side instructions that said stand up and walk. And when he stood up, one of the researchers said, "Why did you stand up?" Now, his left side that has to communicate now has no idea that it saw this information saying stand up and walk. But without missing a beat, the guy says, "Well, I'm thirsty, so going to get a drink of water." So that means that our brains guess when they don't know.
Huh.
Your left brain doesn't want to say it doesn't know, so it will make some shit up.
Yeah.
And let's take a little bit deeper look at that, because if you ask me why I stood up, I would naturally like go back and think a second ago, "Yeah, I remember sitting there and thinking I'm thirsty, therefore I should get up and get drink water." Well, that memory's not there for that guy. So either his brain has like wiped out the previous memory and given him amnesia, or it's implanted a memory of the guy getting thirsty and deciding that he should stand up. So things that our brains tell us are largely guesses sometimes. If you read
Mm.
David Eagleman's book Incognito, there's a serious question as to how much your conscious brain actually does and how much it's actually taking credit for when it hasn't done it. So when we look at something and we have a certain feeling, sometimes our brains are guessing what that feeling is or what it's about. And those guesses don't make us feel good. So it might not even be my real relationship to that thing that's making me feel good. It could be some wild shit that my brain is making up and guessing about why I have this feeling in my body. And that guess doesn't make me feel bad. And, once again, we're off to the races.
Great. So, okay. So, that's a you've kind of given us a pretty good understanding of like how this works. Now, tell us how you incorporate these ideas with psychedelic integration.
Well, in psychedelic integration, it's very helpful in preparation for people to understand that everything your brain says should probably be examined before you accept it as truth. And during a psychedelic experience, a lot of things are going to happen. You're going to have some very strange feelings possibly in your body, some energy you're not used to, and something's going to tell you what that's about. And that might not be the best advice you could get. So if you were hanging out with a person who was constantly guessing at things and wouldn't say, you'd be like, would you just say, I don't know? Don't make shit up. And they keep making things up. You would probably not trust that person after a while.
Mm,
But we have a lot of trust in our brain, even though it's just an organ whose job it is to spit out thoughts and who doesn't want to admit that they don't know or they're wrong. That's not a very reliable person. So there is an aspect to not paying attention to those guesses that are going on, how they're making me feel,
mm,
or you can just observe them and know that they're there. And there's really a lot to in integration before and afterwards. One of the biggest things I work on people with, and there's an element of this through all of our work, is being mindful, being present. And when you say mindfulness, people's brains, they sort of fog over like, oh yeah, meditation and breath work and body scans. But Ellen Langer, who's been researching mindfulness since the 70s, she's a psychology professor at Harvard. She was the first female to be tenured as a psychology professor at Harvard.
mm,
She's the godmother of mindfulness. But for some reason, when people think of mindfulness, they think of John Kabat-Zinn and a bunch of other people. But Ellen Langer has so much peer-reviewed research on mindfulness, and she says that the process of being mindful is simply noticing things.
mm,
That's it.
mm,
If you're noticing things, you're present. So a lot of times people say, I know I'm supposed to be present, but I don't know how to do that. Well, just notice what's going on around you. That's all.
mm,
Be curious. And here's another thing. A big thing with psychedelics is the ability to downregulate the default mode network. Default mode network is the part of my brain that we go into when we're on autopilot. And it's the part that's very self-referential, critical, autobiographical. It can get over into anxiety and even up into panicky states. If you're driving to work the same way that you've driven time and time and time again, you're probably in default mode network. You don't even notice you pull into a parking space, you don't even remember driving. But if you're driving on a road that you don't know at night and it's raining and it's kind of dark and you're having to pay attention, the default mode network's not on. You've then engaged the task positive network. Task positive network is a part of your brain that's engaged when you're paying attention to something, like you know that you have to give this your attention. And the task positive network and default mode network can't be on at the same time.
mm.
One of the things that you can do to engage that part of your brain is to really be curious about what's going on and notice things. And if you do that, all of that mind chatter really quiets down very quickly. Now, there is also a sort of you could call it a physical component to these things, and that would have to do with things like the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve runs from my gut up through my brain. It touches every gland and every organ throughout my body. It's the thing that counteracts fight or flight. And the vagus nerve is, a channel of nerves on two sides going up here. It runs through here, runs here to my brain, and there are a few things you can do to quiet that down, like down regulate the vagus nerve. Those things is simply like you have this little crook in your ear here. You just pull down there, just gently. You feel it warm up a little bit, and after about 30 seconds, you let it go. But if you just pull that down just lightly, can you feel that kind of warm up a little bit?
Yeah.
And then when I let it go, I can feel a little bit of warmth there. And you might feel a
Got a
little
little bit of
calmness.
a zap there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vagus nerve just down regulated.
Mm,
And there are other things we can do. Some of them look a little bit silly, but there are other things we can do to down regulate the vagus nerve. So, for instance, the vagus nerve runs through here. Sometimes it feels like I get really tense and my muscles tighten up and I get anxious. Sometimes my muscles tighten up and they impinge on the vagus nerve, and that causes me to get anxious. So I can just let my head fall over to one side gently and then just put a hand here and just gently tug. And you'll notice a little bit at a time it relaxes a little more, and a little more. You can feel your neck opening up, that muscle loosening. And then you can do the same thing on the other side. Just let it fall over, gently pull over. You feel it a little bit more. And again, about 30 seconds. And then when you get done with that, you can also feel a little bit of release here.
Mm.
So if you stack things like knowing what to expect, like my brain's going to be saying things that may not be very dependable. However, since I am being mindful right now and I'm noticing things, I can use my sense organs. I can tell what's happening around me. I can tell that I'm okay right now. My brain might be wanting me to be anxious, but I'll just say, I'm sitting here talking to Joshua. There's no impending doom right now. There's no danger. So if I have that feeling, okay, I can just have that feeling. There's no state I'm supposed to be in. So, taking all this into account, then you can understand that it's okay just to be in the state that you are. Trying to be in another state isn't necessarily a good thing to do. There are ways that you can control your states or be in a particular state, but there's a time when you got to just let it go and say, this is just the state that I'm in right now, and that's
Mm.
okay. And if you do that, a lot of things happen. You stop fighting with it and really battling with the states that we're in, or what causes problems a lot of times. I know that when I don't feel good, like I'm sick and I'm pushing myself, I'll be kind of stressed out. And sometimes my wife will say, have you thought about just letting yourself be sick? And I just feel this like, oh, thank you. That feels much better. I feel shitty. It feels good just to
Yeah.
realize that and not realize I need to do something.
I think that that's a really good point, that it is okay to feel what you're feeling, and it's just a state, and to remember that that's there doesn't have to be any meaning to what it is. It's just
That's
what you're experiencing in the moment.
one of the worst things you can do in a problem state when you don't feel good is to ask why. Okay. If you're feeling shitty, one of the worst things you can do is ask why. Because, that feeling you have is contained in a little neural network. It's a bunch of neurons that are just there that go fire off at a particular time and you feel a particular way. And when you say, why do I feel this way? Well, now you have to go out and go, was it that thing? Was it that thing? Was it that thing? So you are now recruiting all these things that really don't need to be. So now all these things that you're thinking about are sort of problems, part of this problem state, and you're
Oh.
just throwing stuff in there into this stew, and it's never answering questions because there has never been a person who is deep in a problem state who asked themselves, "Why am I in this state?" Who came back with a good answer about themselves.
It's
There's
what
going
it
to be
sounds
something
like
that you say
is
about yourself that's not that good, or the state, or your friends, or whatever. The good stuff doesn't come up like, now I have it. That's not what
right.
happens. You have to get yourself out of the problem state.
Yeah, it sounds like you just, like, literally attach all these other things to that problem state by doing
You
that.
are. And then when you say, oh, you know what? I think it's that, then you solder them together. So now
Yeah.
those things are lumped together. And now that thing was over here minding its own business. Now it's a part of this problem.
Mm.
Like, how did I get dragged into this? So, the curiosity that you want to have, like if you're not feeling good, you want to engage the task processing network and downregulate the default mode network. So you're going to loosen up your vagus nerve a little bit, and then you'll just say, what is it about this feeling? Not why am I feeling it, not where did it come from, and not how do I stop it. Those are all default mode network questions. But what is it about this thing? I mean, it's a physical sensation. What is that sensation? You don't have to be detailed, just wonder about it and look at it. Because if you look at the thing, and this is another thing where psychedelic integration comes in, like preparation. When you're in a psychedelic experience, if something unpleasant happens, or you can see that something unpleasant is coming, or it's over there, or whatever, one of the best things you can do is to go toward that thing. And
Mm.
if you do, it's going to lose its potency. So if it's a dark room or a monster or a cliff you might fall off of, I always tell people, if you feel like you're going to fall off a cliff, die, go crazy, do those things while you're in the experience, and you'll find out you're going to be fine. You won't really fall off a cliff. You won't go crazy. You won't die. You're not going to be stuck like this. You didn't take too much. It's just asking you to accept this thing. And if you
Mm.
accept it, you're going to feel much better. And there's no such thing as a lesson in the psychedelic experience that's a lesson about the psychedelic experience. They're all lessons about life. Everything that happens in that experience is a demonstration of what you can be doing in your life, including trying to accept the state that I'm in right now, not fighting against it.
Mm. Yeah. That's That's a really powerful statement that you just made right there. So if somebody
Not
is
always easy to follow through with it, but it's good to know it.
for sure, for sure. If somebody's interested in exploring psychedelics for one of these reasons like that you've kind of mentioned of making a change in their life, is there anything that they need to be aware of, or any kind of person that's not a good idea to do?
Well, psychedelics aren't for everyone. So, in some of the clinical trials, when they're interviewing people, they'll ask them to remember their least favorite psychological state from the last few months and ask them, are you prepared to have that amplified 5 to 10 times? And if the answer is no, then this might not be something that you want to do because there's a chance that you're going to be very, very uncomfortable during the experience. And that's a good thing if you know what to do with it because that's stuff that's getting out of you. The only
Mm,
way it's going to get out of you is you feel it. So psychedelics just kind of push all that stuff out. Like, you just need to feel this stuff and it'll be out of you. And it can make you feel kind of shitty. But as we've already determined, we mentioned earlier, sometimes doing the work just means feeling shitty for a while. That's kind
mhm.
of the lesson of these things. Most of the time, when people have an unpleasant psychedelic experience, that happens in the first part, and later they feel better. And that's another lesson. Hey, if you let yourself feel these things, you're going to feel a lot better. See what just happened? It's kind of demonstrating that for you. But people who don't want to be pushed and have that sort of experience amplified should tread with caution. People who have some history of psychosis, including schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, should proceed with caution. Really, people with schizophrenia and people with psychosis of any kind should probably stay away from psychedelics because they can tip you over. Bipolar disorder has generally been advised like that's not a good candidate for psychedelics. But there's some question about that with certain people now. There's a guy named Benjamin Mudge who's doing a lot of research on using ayahuasca for people with bipolar disorder. But I don't know all the details of that. That's generally the advice. And people who are looking for the psychedelics to change them somehow will probably be disappointed. And that may be the journey that they have to have. And that's what happens a lot of times. But, people will say, like, this is my last hope. Well, if that's what you're thinking going in, you probably should not be working with psychedelics because every one of the clinical trials that you read about has a significant therapeutic component before and after. I mean, it is called MDMA assisted therapy and psilocybin assisted therapy. This is what happened to me. I saw all kinds of things that should have mattered to me and should have told me to change what I was doing, but I couldn't do it by just seeing it. I had to do something else after that. There was something else I had to do. And there's way too much hype about how neuroplasticity just rewires the brain. Yeah, your brain really lights up during a psychedelic experience, but again, unless you do something differently, and that can be having a different attitude or thought, but unless you do something differently, you're not firing a new neural network. You're not making something new happen. You're firing all the old ones, and all the old ones will take you where you were before.
Right.
It's possible to have some sort of transformation happen and just have that like be on you and have it change you. But it's far more often that people feel like that they've changed, especially in the aftermath. There can be a time, hours, days, weeks afterwards, where it feels like everything's different, and it all kind of falls back to where it was.
Yeah,
That's why we want to be mindful. That's why we want to watch our reactions to things. That's why we want to minimize our reactivity, which is a big part of my path. That's why we want to do all those things to help you be in a state that's going to, because ultimately you're looking for a state.
hmm
You might say you're looking for A, B, C, X, Y, or Z, but really you're looking for the state you're going to be in when you get any of those things.
right. That makes me think of the of manifestation and focusing on how you want to how you're going to be when you have the thing that you want,
Yeah,
so that you can move towards that.
yeah, exactly. Because if you just picture that, I don't think that it's so much that the universe starts, it's a slot machine and it starts turning gears to bring me that thing. If I picture it in my mind through, intention or prayer or mantra or what have you, whatever my method of like visualization or manifestation is. But I do think that once you have it in your mind, then you're going to start moving in ways both conscious and unconscious that will take you toward that.
Right. Right.
And that's the theory behind a lot of patterns in NLP. Once you see that thing, you're going to start moving toward it in a particular way.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk around psychedelics now and really altered states in general. Like you see articles on breath work, on tantra, on psychedelics, on all these different ideas. What is making you excited about the future right now?
The fact that people are figuring out that states in themselves are healing, well, I say people are figuring out, but it seems like things are converging. So, of course, in like in HNLP, there are a lot of influences that come from neuroscience, um, from particle physics, from different areas, and those things are all kind of converging and showing us pretty much the same thing, like where we're heading. And everything is just kind of connected,
Mm,
and everything influences everything else. And there's very little we do that doesn't affect us in some other way. So observing ourselves is endlessly fascinating. I mean, that's really what excites me is that we're starting to see things about how people operate and how we work that we really haven't known before. I mean, NLP and HNLP are still really new. NLP was just developed in the mid 70s.
hmm
I mean, that's just 50 years ago. That's nothing. HNLP, 20, 25 years, maybe 30 years. So the way that the human brain works and the things that we're finding out about other disciplines that we bring into these are kind of fascinating. We bring in the elements of mindfulness. We bring in work from people like Judson Brewer, who runs the Yale Smoking Cessation Clinic, who has a lot of research on habit loops and internal sensations and how we relate to those. We start looking at those. We really start picking apart what makes a person, what I was always looking for. What happens in between this and what comes out of me? That's what's really exciting to me is we're starting to really figure out what happens in between there. And a
mm,
lot of people don't know this yet.
yeah. Greg, how can people learn more about you?
Well, I'm Greg Lawrence on Facebook. My website is psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. You can always reach me at greg at psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com.
And what is the one insight that you want the listening audience to leave with today?
Well, so I talked about Ellen Langer before, and she's done some very interesting studies, and I'll just touch on two of them.
Mm-hmm.
In one, they gave two teams of similarly skilled salespeople the same script to sell magazines. This was a while back when people were still selling magazines, obviously. And she told one team, I want you to use this script exactly how it is every time you interact with someone. Don't change anything. This is a tested, proven script. She told the other team, I want you to use this script exactly how it is, but every time you use it, I want you to change one thing in it so slightly that I wouldn't even notice when I wrote the script. Just vary it just a little bit so that you know these guys outsold these guys significantly. And people who made the buying decision later said they saw these people as more charismatic. All they did was they were paying attention to what they were doing because they knew we were going to change one thing. These guys were on autopilot. Okay. These guys
Yeah.
seemed more interesting for some reason. She worked with a symphony orchestra, and there was a particular symphony that they played. And she said, this time when you play it, and being in a symphony orchestra is a very exact kind of job. You're not winging it or doing what you want, or
Right.
the conductor's going to kick your ass out. So she tells everybody, I want you to play the symphony, but this time I want you to change one thing in it so slightly that nobody else will notice. Only you. And when they got done, almost all of them said, I really enjoyed that. Much more. We've played that hundreds of times, but I really enjoyed playing it that time. Later, when they played recordings of when they played it before and that time, people preferred the one where people changed something and they didn't know why. So Ellen Langer's conclusion, after more than 40 years of peer-reviewed research, says that there's one thing that you can do that will help you to live longer, be happier, be healthier, and cause people around you to respond more positively. And that is to every day just notice what is new and different.
Mm,
That's it. And it doesn't have to be new things like you've never seen. I've got two ceiling fans in here. That one has three little bells and it's from Hampton Bay. And this has just like one big thing and it's a no name and it's got like speckles on it. I didn't know that a few months ago. there are things all over me right now I haven't looked at closely. So I try to take some time and notice those things for the first time. And if you're noticing things, you're present. And if you're present, you're not looking at the past or the future, and you're actually here where right now everything is okay. And the more you can cultivate the habit of noticing things and being present, the happier you will be.
Mm, I love that. Was that the you said you were going to talk about two studies?
No, those were the
Oh,
two,
those were the two studies.
the two studies she did: salespeople and the symphony orchestra.
I was not apparently I wasn't present enough for that.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Greg, it's been a really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I had a blast.
Hey there. If you feel like something holds you back from reaching your true potential, listen up. I've got something incredible to share with you. I'm offering a free 7-day email program that helps you break through those blocks to get to the unshakable confidence and success that you deserve. Imagine starting each day with a clear mind, a strong sense of purpose, and the confidence to go after whatever it is that you truly want. This program guides you through a powerful process to uncover and then eliminate the root causes of your limitations. You receive daily emails with practical steps, immersive audio exercises, and techniques that help you rewrite your personal story. As your expert coach, I am there to support you every step of the way. Now, people have used this program to remove old triggers and create a new empowering mindset, or others have used it to remove resistance to taking certain actions. You can have these same kind of results or something different. If you feel ready to break free from what holds you back, the fears, the worries, the anxieties, those old patterns, whatever they are, and you're ready to embrace a life of confidence and fulfillment, go to xfactorhypnosis.com/transform. It's completely free and you gain a more empowered you. You can use the link in the show notes or just type xfactorhypnosis.com/transform into your favorite browser. Thanks for listening. And remember, stay curious, keep growing, and embrace your transformation.